crash course on Southern Gothic literature. But if you're watching this video, you probably already know that. By the end of this crash course, you should not only be a master at understanding what Southern Gothic literature exactly is, but you will be able to identify themes, understand where it came from, how it came to be, and how it reflects the time period in which it was written in. Now, we here at Crash Course are dedicated to making educational videos that inform our communities, but since it's a bit difficult to communicate with you directly, we are going to have a mediator who will help us with any kind of interaction that I find necessary, which is why I will refer to myself as Simona 1, and Simona 2 here will introduce herself now. Yes, and she will help with all types of interaction. So before we begin, I'd like to ask you a very simple question, and that is, what do you think of when you hear the words Southern Gothic? I'm hearing some very good answers. Southern Gothic. Yes, very acceptable, very relevant. You are right. As any genre of literature, Southern Gothic did not just come out of nowhere. No, that doesn't happen. Literature reflects the people who write it, the authors, their lives, the environments they grew up in, the time period, their influences, customs, which is why, in order to understand how Southern Gothic came to be, we need to rewind just a little bit. We are taking it back to 18th and 19th century England. Suddenly there's the emergence of a new type of writing referred to as Gothic. Writers are now writing about spooky, supernatural, horrific ideas. There's a sense of terror and an uncomfortable aspect to the writing. There's deformities and violence, and it's all encompassing this dark theme. And I am having some trouble hearing you from back here. I'm not sure why, but I believe that when I asked what you think of when you hear Southern Gothic, some of you refer to Gothic architecture, and in fact, much of this genre was set in settings such as, dark, spooky castles, or abbeys, or dungeons, large, deserted, often religious places, all that reflected this idea of darkness. And believe it or not, you are probably familiar with some of the most famous Gothic stories that came from England during this time period. I'm going to give you just a little hint if you can. Any guesses? Green spooky monster. Sound familiar? Yes, in fact, Frankenstein and Frankenstein. Well, that's a new word. Frankenstein and Dracula are some of the most famous texts of the Gothic genre. So again, you can see the vampires, the blood, the green spooky monsters that don't really exist. And the reason it's important to understand that this came from England is because the Southern Gothic writers and the Southern Gothic genre actually emerged from this. Southern Gothic writers changed it to reflect, where they were, their own settings, their own lives. But the literary movement known as Southern Gothic really emerged from the Gothic movement in England. So this is really the start of Southern Gothic literature. And now it's time for part 1 pop quiz. You didn't think I was gonna test you? How else am I supposed to know you're actually getting something out of this? Let's take a plane to the Americas. We have these Southern writers. It is the post-Civil War era. What do they see around them? So the Civil War, in essence, was the downfall of the South, and there's decay everywhere. And not only in the sense that these plantation houses are actually decaying in the years following the Civil War. These once great Southern families really are nothing. And writing in England, there was a sense of, this dark architecture and this sort of decaying essence as well. And these writers in America recognized it. And so they, in a way, channeled what they saw in England and made it their own. One of the biggest differences between the Gothic genre in England and the Southern Gothic genre in the Americas is that the Southern Gothic genre was set in the South. Most Southern Gothic stories are set in southern towns that used to be, great Civil War towns. So, of course, an element of Southern Gothic writing is often a setting set in the South. Also related to the fact that these stories often examine the social ruin of Southern families. It's often about these once very highly ranked individuals who now are really not important. However, there are similarities to the Gothic genre. The stories often encompass violence and horror. Southern Gothic writing often examines religion. Religion and violence are often correlated because the violence is used to bring attention to this. I'd like to depict violence. I'm actually going to need the assistance of Simona number 2 to show how violence was exactly used in these stories. Imagine you're reading a story about Simona number 2. Girl in the South. So she's walking along, and suddenly she gets shot in the face. And she dies. Right in the spot. She's dead. Murdered. As a reader, how would you react? It would be kind of startling, right? It would be kind of like, what just happened? Why did that just take place? Or, whoa, I was not expecting that. And that's the whole genius behind it. Because it makes you go, and it opens your eyes and you're like, okay, why? First of all, why did the author put that in there? Second of all, what does it mean? Because it is so random and so unexpected, you as a reader actually stop and consider the meaning of this event. Many of the characters are deformed, add a different flavor of writing, and so there's often a dark humor to it, which you didn't get in England. It's not like you were reading Frankenstein and laughing at how weird or how spooky this is. No, it was just creepy and mysterious, kind of twisted, and the best way to say it is it's funny in an awful way. And now it's time for part 2, pop quiz. Nope, I'm just kidding. Here at CrashCourse, we're not just about giving you the basic concepts. No, once we are done here, you are not only going to understand the basics of Southern Gothic literature, but you are going to know examples of Southern Gothic texts and how these elements apply to them. Famous Southern Gothic writers were William Faulkner and Flannery O'Connor. I have 3 stories here from Flannery O'Connor and 1 from William Faulkner. And what's interesting is that not only do you see clearly and explicitly the elements of Southern Gothic writing in these pieces, but you also see the similarities between them. And start with A Good Man Is Hard to Find, Flannery O'Connor. There's a family, and of course there's a grandma. And this grandma, she claims to be, the matriarch of the family, the person she wants to make all the decisions. She keeps nagging her son, who's the father of 3 children, and they all go on a road trip to Florida. And basically, throughout the course of this road trip, the grandma, is telling them where to stop, is making comments, and she's really not a good person. And you can see that in her grandchildren and her children. They're all not very good people. And at the same time, there's a murderer on the loose called the Misfit. And basically what ends up happening is this family gets stranded when the car accident occurs, and the Misfit comes and basically murders the entire family. How's that for an ending? So The murder is this act of violence that comes in Southern Gothic stories that is meant to bring to light a greater message about the faults of society. So Flannery O'Connor was actually a very religious person. She was Roman Catholic. Every author has a purpose. And in this case, she wanted to show, she claims to be a good Christian, but throughout the story she really exhibits no qualities of being a religious, devoted individual. However, in the last moments of her life, she shows the qualities of what being a true Christian really is. She explains in her words in an essay why she decided to murder an entire. I suppose the reasons for the use of so much violence in modern fiction will differ with each writer who uses it, but in my own stories, I found that violence is strangely capable of returning my characters to reality and preparing them to accept their moment of grace. Their heads are so hard that almost nothing else will do the work. This idea that reality is something to which we must be returned at considered cost is one which is seldom understood by the casual reader, but it is one which is implicit in the Christian view of the world. In other words, Flannery O'Connor is using this shocking, horrific event to basically slap the reader's face and tell them to, wake up. Look at what's happening here. We all claim to be these good Christian people, but are we really? Now you have two stories that are actually very similar. I mean, they were written both by Flannery O'Connor, but anyways, the first one is The Life You Save May Be Your Own, and the second one is Good Country People. Country, Southern, ring a bell? Anyways, we're going to start with The Life You Save May Be Your Own. So basically there's this guy, his name is Mr. Shiflett. He has a stump for an arm, and he comes to Miss Lucynell Carter. Lucynell Carter is actually the name of a daughter and her mother. They are both named Lucynell Carter. The daughter is mentally ill. And Mr. Shiflett says, I will fix everything. But all Miss Carter really wants is to get her daughter married. This poor mentally ill girl, she's willing to get her married to a stranger she just met, Mr. Shiflett. And Mr. Shiflett doesn't care about the daughter. I mean, he'll marry her, but all he really wants is that car to go do whatever he wants to do. And that's essentially what happens. He leaves poor Lucynell in a diner. He drives off in his new car, or stolen car, or whatever you call it, and he goes off into the distance, and he sees a sign, The Life You Save May Be Your Own, and maybe he feels a little bit of guilt for, just ruining a life 5 minutes ago, and decides to save another one. So he picks up this kid who's hitchhiking, and he tries, to tell this sad story about his mom, and how, this kid shouldn't leave his mom, and it all backfires, and the kid gets out of the car, and Mr. Shiflett drives off into rain, predicting a great future for him. But basically, there's a lot more to this story than just this con artist. It talks a lot, again, Flannery O'Connor being the religious person that she is really, really showing religion through this story. Mr. Shiflett has a stump for an arm, and there's a part in the story where he looks up at the sun and he makes a cross, but that cross is crooked because his arm is crooked. Okay, yeah, you get the point. His arm is crooked and the cross is crooked. He's not a good Christian person. Do you get the point? Lucynell is referred to as an angel, so he's referred to as an angel. It's also it's also a Christian symbolism, but it's also, he fails to see her as an angel while everybody else does. However, it's a little bit funny too. There's humor. There's that grotesque deformity of his stump, and of course it's set in the South. There's a lot of Southern imagery. Flannery O'Connor does a great job with that. And guess what Good Country People has? The main character is this girl, but she's not a girl. She's also past her prime. Her name is Helga. This kid, this young boy comes. He's selling Bible. Helga, go, and she thinks he's so naive and she's so smart and she understands that nothing really matters. Love is stupid and this is stupid, and she thinks that she doesn't believe in anything, and she's going to seduce Manly. He doesn't really care about selling Bibles, and he steals her wooden leg. That's best phrase in the story is the guy saying, I don't think since the day I was born. He's basically saying, hey, you think you don't believe in anything? No, I don't believe in anything, and that's why I have your leg. And of course, set in the South, Southern Gothic, there's no violence. Bizarre. It's the last thing you would expect to happen as a reader, the last but still very important when William Faulkner's A Rose for Emily. Now this one, out of all four of these, really showcases the Southern Gothic idea of post-Civil War decay. So basically in the story, this lady, Emily Grierson, her family used to be great. After the Civil War, she still lives in the same town, but the town's been industrialized, you know? Her house is kind of decaying, and she as a person is decaying. It's post-Civil War, so it's again showcasing how different the South has become. She's well past her prime to get married. Her father has recently died, and he never really let her get married. Just being set in the South and talking about Southern antebellum decay is not enough. There has to be something horrific that makes this Southern Gothic, and of course, William Faulkner does not disappoint. Emily Grierson is a murderer. She dies, and then sometime later, they smell something, and they go up to discover a dead body in her bed, in his pajamas, like neatly organized in a bed. And there are signs that she was sleeping next to him for a long time. I think we should all give William Faulkner a round of applause for such a creative ending. Actually, who is implied to be her lover. Probably what was going to happen is that he was going to leave her, and that thought was just too much for her to bear. I mean, she was already all alone, so she decided to kill him instead and put him in her bed so he could never leave her. That's one way to keep the man. And it makes the reader consider, like, wow, she really was desperate. So, 4 stories, 4 examples of Southern Gothic. You should be a Southern Gothic master. You have completed this crash course. By now, you should be experts on Southern Gothic, from the origin to the elements to the application of famous works. But now is your ultimate assessment. How else are you supposed to know that you understand Southern Gothic until you apply the concepts? And that is exactly what Simona number 2 is going to help me do. Let's take a fairy tale. That's right, a fairy tale. I've chosen one for you. Snow White. Now you might be saying, and even Simona number 2 over there might be saying, how on earth are we supposed to do that? The very first part of writing a Southern Gothic story is setting it in the South. The beautiful Southern belle, somewhere in the South, living in a town where, yes, her father was once an important Southern man, but now he's passed away and she lives with her stepmother, who still seems to have the illusion of Southern wealth and of Southern importance. A devout Christian, perhaps some dark humor and some awfully violent event that I'll leave up to you. Simona number 2 can help you finish up on that. Thank you for watching BCA Crash Course on Southern Gothic, and I hope to see you back soon.